So although we have the Safe Drinking Water Act and it's federally regulated and it's monitored by the states and the drinking filtration plants, we still have drinking water problems. Not everywhere. But we're going to talk about two issues that you're probably familiar with because they've been in the news quite a bit over the past couple of years. The first one we'll talk about is hydraulic fracturing, or really more commonly it's just referred to as fracking. Fracking is a new way to get oil and natural gas from the ground. So a typical oil well or natural gas well usually drills straight down, and similar to well water, the oil and natural gas just seep out of it and then we pump it back up. But it's not very efficient and it's hard to reach other sources of natural gas and oil in those areas. So the way the fracking techniques works, it's very similar. You have this drill that goes down, but then it also drills sideways. And so you have this long, essentially pipe or drill going down, and then what we do is we pump a whole bunch of water into this pipe, and we pump it incredibly fast. And I mean like super hard pressure, like faster than a fire hose. And it's going with so much pressure that it's breaking up the rocks. And that's what you can see here in this image. Now in those rocks was natural gas and oil. And what happens is that natural gas and oil seep back into this water and back up the tower. And that's where we collect it and filter out that water. Now it's not just water, it's actually water plus over 100 different chemicals, but no one actually knows what those chemicals are because they're not regulated. And we'll talk about that more soon. But as you can imagine, this could be an issue. If you're releasing these chemicals into the ground, if there is groundwater nearby, like you see here, there's a potential for contamination. It's not always 100% because maybe there's not groundwater there, or maybe the groundwater is above the drill site or below the drill site. So here you see they're not even touching, but they could. So fracking should be considered an injection well. Remember, the Safe Drinking Water Act is protecting our groundwater resources. So things like septic tanks and injection wells where people put their hazardous waste, those are all regulated under this act. However, although hydraulic fracturing is very similar, you're digging down into the ground, you're releasing chemicals, it's actually exempt. Fracking companies don't have to get any kind of permits and don't have to disclose any of the chemicals that they're doing. And that's kind of where a lot of the news has been, is that they're not permitted and we don't know what's happening. Now the reason this exists, the reason they're exempt, is something called the Halliburton loophole. So Halliburton is the name of the company that kind of invented fracking. Fracking has been around for a long time, but it's only recently that it's been used more and more. So Halliburton is kind of the company that's credited with inventing it and using it quite a bit. Well, the old CEO of Halliburton is Dick Cheney. If you are not familiar with who Dick Cheney is, Dick Cheney was the former Vice President of the United States. Well, it really helps to be the Vice President of the United States when you want your company to be exempt from something. He was the one who pushed through Congress to pass this exemption on fracking, which should make sense because it's benefiting his company or his previous company. And that's why it exists. So hopefully that changes. Even if we still keep doing fracking, we should at least regulate it to have an idea of what chemicals are entering the environment, and also just to set up rules. If there is groundwater, you need to do fracking at least 200 feet above it or below it, for example. What's really great about our state here in Maryland is fracking is actually banned on Maryland lands. And this is just due to the fact that we don't have regulations of it. It's possible in the future we will allow fracking, but they would have to follow Maryland rules that we set up since the federal government does not have any rules. Right now that's not really in the works, but just letting you know that could potentially happen. What's even more awesome about this is our current governor is a Republican. Typically, It's Republicans that are kind of pushing for coal and natural gas and oil, and so typically they're the ones who are supporting fracking. So the fact that we had a Republican governor kind of veto against it and ban it was kind of a huge step in both parties working towards a common goal of protecting our environment, but really protecting our drinking water. So what I'd like you to do is, I want you to watch this video. It's a very quick clip, but it's really important for you to watch it now because I'm going to talk about it right afterwards. Now, the reason we banned fracking in Maryland, despite having a Republican governor, it wasn't because of the environment. It was because of human health. You know, if you're someone who's drinking this groundwater and it's contaminated with oil and natural gas and all these chemicals we don't know what they are, that's really going to affect our citizens. So this video kind of shows some of those things that you can expect. So go ahead and pause here and take a look at this video coming up. Alright, so you've watched that video and maybe your mind was just as blown as mine was. This guy literally lights his water on fire. And you probably shouldn't drink that, right? Like, the reason it's able to catch on fire is, one, there could be natural gas that seeped out of these cracks that were made through fracking into the groundwater. Or two, it's just all the other chemicals that are in this water, again, seeped out of these cracks into the groundwater. And if this was someone's private well, there's no water filtration going on except what they might locally have. If it was at a huge filtration plant, maybe the filtration plant wasn't equipped to handle these kinds of chemicals because they don't know what these chemicals are. And so that's why there's a whole bunch of debate over it, especially with fracking happening where people live. If it's happening in the middle of nowhere, no one's really arguing against it or fighting against it. It's just where people are living, it's a whole bunch of issues. There's also some other issues surrounding fracking, but they're not really related to water, so we're really not going to touch into it. But if it's a topic that interests you, there is so much research out there, so definitely take a look. So that's one drinking water problem. Another drinking water problem that's pretty recent is Flint, and what happened in Flint, Michigan. And you probably heard about this tons and tons in the news, and you might know more or you might know less. I'm going to give you kind of the basics and a kind of basic timeline of what was happening. So this all started in April 2014, where Flint, which is a small town in Michigan, they used to get their water from Detroit and from a Detroit filtration plant. And that water was fine, but the city of Flint wanted to save money. And instead of paying for all of that water to be pipelined down to Flint, they wanted to use their local river, the Flint River, in order to kind of save money. And they were doing this for a short amount of time while they built like a new state-of-the-art filtration plant. So they're grabbing water from the Flint River. They have a filtration plant to filter that Flint River water. So they're saving money that way. Another way they wanted to save money is to not use a corrosion inhibitor, which was a big no-no. A corrosion inhibitor we have seen before. This is that orthophosphate that we saw earlier when talking about drinking water. Well, is it not going to let me write? Okay. Well, this was written earlier when we were looking at drinking water filtration. Orthophosphate. Orthophosphate is a corrosion inhibitor. Corrosion is essentially rusting. If you think about our old pipes, we used to use lead pipes everywhere. And even in the Washington area, we still have some lead pipes. Lead, and really any metal, is going to rust in the presence of water, which is flowing through these pipes. And so when they rust, it starts looking like this. And that rust starts flaking off and getting into the water. And so that was happening with these lead pipes. Now, the way we combat that is filtration plants add orthophosphate or some other chemical that is what we call a corrosion inhibitor. And what it does is it lines the inside of these pipes. It's an invisible chemical, we don't see it, but as it flows down these pipes, it attaches to the side and essentially helps prevent that metal from rusting. And if it is rusting, it kind of puts a protective layer over it so it won't mix with the water. But Flint was trying to save money. Not only were they getting local water, but they decided not to use that chemical. And because they didn't use that chemical, the lead pipes in that town started to rust. And that lead rust was dissolving in the water. And so the residents of Flint were drinking lead in their water. And lead is a very, very toxic chemical. So keep in mind, April 2014 is when the problem first started. February 2015, 10 months later, is it starts getting traction. We're starting to see news stories. The EPA is kind of getting involved, kind of. Residents are creating a big stir, and they're taking action, and they're leading they are leading protests, they are writing people, they are communicating with people a year later. And the residents have been doing this whole time. It took them a year to get it worked up the food chain. And the reason it took so long is a lot of people were downplaying it. Oh, it's okay. The water's fine. You just need to boil it. There's nothing wrong with it. We checked it. Lead is fine. There's no issues. But actually, in the meantime, there were issues. But there was a lot of covering up of stuff and downplaying of stuff. And we'll look at that in a little bit. So February 2015, 10 months later, the people who can actually make a change are starting to hear about this. It was not until October 2015 that the water got switched back to that Detroit water. So between April 2014 and October 2015, the residents of Flint had this lead water that they're ingesting because they're boiling it, because the city said, yeah, you can boil it and it'll be just fine. It's yellow, but don't worry about that. And so residents are like, okay, this is my only source of water. And they're bathing in it, and maybe they're not drinking it anymore, but they're still using it for their clothes and their dishes, and they're still getting in contact with that lead. And so it took over a year and a half in order for something to change. And it was all because we just didn't use this corrosion inhibitor, and it was all due to money.